Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're live from Inkarnate Town. Today, we're going to be creating a epic fantasy world. We're going on an epic quest to create a very epic world. It's going to be epic in the sense of scale. It's going to be epic in the sense of diversity of biomes and all the cultures and civilizations that comes with all of those biomes. So we just released some new art for the fantasy world style. So this is a great time to showcase all that beautiful art. And we're also going to be putting a special emphasis in this first episode. This is just part one on how to make land masses. And there's a lot of various ways to create land masses. We'll go over that here, and hopefully this will be helpful when you're kind of creating your world. So first and foremost, whenever you're creating a new map, you go to create new map and you want to choose the fantasy world style. I try to select a scale. And so what I'll do is each grid size will equal a certain number of square miles. So scale is the start, and the scale is going to help you with so much. The scale can help you with how big the stamps will be. The scale is going to help with distances between locations, how long a land mass is, or distances between one landmass to another. So scale is super important, and you as a world builder has to decide just how important scale is to you, because scale can be broken. You can cheat, you can overlap it a little bit. So it's just up to you. It's an artistic choice, and it's also a utility choice for you as a DM. So what I normally do is I'll set each individual square cell within the grid to 1,000 square miles. So if you wanted to make something close to the Earth, it's roughly 24,000 square miles, probably a little more than that. So you would put in 24 columns, because 24 times 1,000 is 24,000. And then you would go 15 here, and that's going down. So that's going to be your rows. It's about 15, so 15,000 miles right there. So that is, so when you first create your world map, set the unit of measurement that you want for each cell, and then you'll choose how many cells or how many columns and rows that you want within that grid, and that should set up a scale for you right away. Now, you don't have to use 1,000 square miles. You know, some people in Europe who use kilometers. Whatever your metric is, just choose one. I'm just choosing 1,000 because it's an easy metric mathematically for my brain to translate. So it's just so much easier. If you're going to do something like 1,100 square miles per unit, just know that there's going to be a little more math involved. So it's up to you and how difficult you want that to go. Now, I've already kind of got a map already set up, or at least not the map itself, but a map editor set up. So we're going to open this up and we're going to get started. For this one, I chose 20 by 15, I believe. So it's 20,000 miles by 15,000 miles. That's going to be the scale for the map that I'm going to be working on. And it's just your standard landscape aspect ratio. So just remember, always set the scale first, and then that way you have an idea of what you're kind of working with. So we're going to create this epic fantasy world. And what I normally do is I try to come up with some small story before I jump in. And I usually start with the creation story. And I'm a giant fan of science, so I always try to maybe give a mythological spin to something that might be scientific, but each person has their own way. Some people might follow religion as the theology, those kind of mythological creation stories or Genesis stories, whatever you want. That's just the way I'm going to go about it. And with my story, I'm going to have a goddess that shed a tear and it landed on a rock, and that rock was the planet that this world is going to take place on. That's what the world is. And that tear became a cradle of life, and it kind of created the oceans. And then with that came all the life that comes with water. So I'm using this creation myth to kind of help figure out the arrangement of the continents that I'm going to do. Because what I want is I want to create this torrent, or a kind of a whirlpool where the tear dropped, and that whirlpool is there forever. And then I'll kind of put my land masses kind of circling it or framing it, but not exactly. And I want to, again, make sure that I have mountains. I want to have land masses that kind of fit around it in a jigsaw. So let's go over some things first when we start. Remember, I mentioned scale. So let's go with that. So I make sure that grid is on. The grid's going to help me. I set it to 20 by 15. Remember that a square mile is 1,000 square feet, or not feet, 1,000 square miles, sorry. 1,000 square miles. So just remember that. And that means that the width and the height of the map, again, 20,000 by 15,000 miles. Hey, Bitter Dan. Hey, Zodiac Devilix. First time chatter. Glad that you're here. And then, of course, I also usually make a little scale using the shape tool because this is going to help to give me the smaller increments. And I set scale to 1,000 miles long. And so this scale can be used like this to kind of measure distances. Now, we're not going to use this scale quite yet. We don't need it because we're going to start with land masses first, and that's super important. So I'll go ahead and just going to select everything and turn the opacity down on all of these. There we go. Okay. I'll keep my grid on for now because, again, this is going to help me to decide just how big the land masses will be. So after I've done the creation story, after I've kind of chosen the scale and done all that, then I want to set up a little climate zone guide. And the climate zone guide is going to help me to figure out where my biomes are. And so these are really easy to make. You just turn on your grid, make these lines with the line tool, and then just set the lines to look differently. So I put dashed lines and I put the equator as a straight solid line. And so I've used the grid. And so you have in the center your equator, and then your tropics, your subtropics, your temperate zones, and then your polar regions. So having this up is going to be very, very helpful. So this way I kind of know where to put certain biomes once I put the land masses up. Now, for some people, it might be confusing, like, well, when do I start going into biome development and all that stuff? Well, you start first by creating the land masses. So we'll wait for another episode to go into biomes. For this one, we're just going to focus on land masses. Okay, so now that I have this up and I understand scale, now I can decide the ways in which I want to create land masses. Now, if you're kind of new to Inkarnate and you're kind of a beginner, kind of green with the tool, let's start with the basic way that most people use it, which is the add mode of the mask tool. Okay, and I'm going to set my roughness down to maybe 4 or 5. And I'm going to turn my smooth off for now. You can have it on or off. It's up to you. And you can enable your mask effects to be on or off. I usually turn off the mask effects so that they don't cause any lag. Okay. Now, the first method, which is the most easiest method I find, is to create a supercontinent and then to break it up into sections. So think of it as like the supercontinent or the Pangea method. And so what I'll do is what you want to do is just create a blob of shape. It doesn't really matter if the continent looks great or fantastic or not, or if you have details on the continent like horns and archipelagos. Don't worry about that. The first step is just to get the giant continent shape up. And you can go in right here with the bucket and just fill it. There you go. Okay, so that's the first step, is the Pangea method. From there, you're going to use the mask tool. You're going to use the subtract mode and just bring the brush down. And now you can decide how many continents you want. Do you want 6? Do you want 7? Do you want just one supercontinent? Do you want to have a dozen continents? That's up to you. So you have to decide. Once you get to this part where you've created the supercontinent, now you have to decide how many times you have to cut this thing like a steak. How many cuts do you have to make to get to the number of continents that you want? And so let's say that I wanted to create 4 continents, or maybe 5 or 6. Let's actually go with 6. I like that number. Then you would go in with that subtract mode and then go ahead and start cutting up the pieces that you want. This is just the second step. It's just kind of creating the shapes. You'll have to subtract more as you go, but we're just getting with it. So right now we have 3. We want to create, let's see, a couple more. So let's go ahead and put another one right here. And now we have 4 continents. Let's create one more. Let's put another one right here. Okay. So now that we have that, so now you have at least where the location or the shapes of each one are. Now you have to create room in between them. Now, one thing that I find very interesting, and you'll see this on Earth, is there are something called seas. And what seas are they're basically an ocean, salt water, but they're kind of quarantined a little bit in and surrounded by, and not completely surrounded by, there's usually a little strait that leads into it, like the Mediterranean Sea, the Black Sea. With these seas, it's salt water, but it's not necessarily an ocean, it's a sea. And so seas, I think, are really nice elements on a map that make them look more realistic. And the way that I go about this is, first, I want to create some distance between. So what you're doing is you're shaving down the land masses. And when it comes to land masses, it's always a process. There's always step 1, step 2, step 3. It's never going to be one simple, easy step. Whenever you're creating something epic, it's going to create a little bit of time and effort to make it. Just know there's no super easy way. You can speed up your process, you can get faster, more efficient, but you can't really make an epic creation of any kind of art in a very short period of time. It always requires a little bit of time. And so patience is one of those things you just need to have when you're kind of putting it together. So let's just keep shaving off to where I kind of have some space in between, and I want to create a sea. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and take my climate zone guide and just going to turn it down a little bit so that I can kind of work with this. And this part right here is a sea. This part right here, this part would be a sea. And I think those are really, really nice. Those look really, really good. Let's go ahead and here as well. We'll shave this one down. Create some distance and maybe even a sea that kind of goes into here. And sometimes if you feel that there's not a lot of space, when you start getting into these thinner spaces right here, it starts getting smaller and there's not much space here. I think that's when you got to start being careful. And so either you can create a new continent out of it by cutting it off, or you can just get rid of it altogether, one section of it altogether, or you can reshape it to where it doesn't look quite as odd as it did before. Okay, so basically step 1, the mega continent. 2, breaking them up into however many number of continents you want. Step 3, start carving in some space in between each continent, because the continents aren't going to be so close together. I mean, unless it's in that process of development to where the plates where each continent hasn't broken off. Depends on the stage of your world's development. If the world is still rather young, then maybe you do want your continents closer together. But that drift, that continental drift that happens, if you want to show that some time has passed, then you're probably going to want to create more distance in between the land masses. So if you want to create like an ancient world, then the land masses are probably going to have more distance between them. If it's a fresh, young planet, then the land masses might be closer together as they're breaking apart, right? So it's up to you to decide that. And then once you've created the distance and the space in between them, then you go down to that last part, which is carving up the little features. And you usually go with a much smaller brush. Going with a much smaller brush, like this. And then start creating your inlets. Start creating your straits. Start creating some more inlets, maybe a horn, a hook. That's the next step, is kind of shaving down those smaller pieces. Now, I'm not going to use this method for the map that we're about to create, but I wanted to show you this is that first method, that Pangea method. Okay? All right, let's take a step back. Now, the last step that I do is I start creating islands around the coastlines, or creating archipelagos. And sometimes you can create archipelagos that were, maybe you show that broke off. So maybe these two land masses right here, you could have them close together like this, and then put a series of islands. And then it looks like at one point, this landmass right here, these two land masses right here were once attached to each other, right? Because you've created an archipelago, a series of islands, right? All the other islands might have sunk, or they got destroyed, or whatever it might be. So little tiny islands around your continent kind of breaks up the globular feel of it. And if any of you have seen my making forests, you create the bulk of the forest first, and then you create these small trees to break up that giant bulky blob of forests. It's the exact same concept here, only with land, right? You're just going to create little islands around the edge like this. And what that will do is break up those blobs, make some islands fairly large, make some kind of small. It's always nice to throw in a mix between large islands, medium islands, and small islands. Okay? And that way there's a diversity of sizes. And just remember, don't forget scale. These land masses right here are absolutely massive when you think about it. I mean, this one right here is roughly 8,000 miles across. So that's quite large. So you'll have to think about whittling them down to the right scale that you're looking for. But I hope you get the idea when you're working with the mask tool, the Pangea method. This is probably the most well-known that I know of. So let's go ahead and just remove all of this. And we're going to go with another method that's helpful, because sometimes people struggle with making the proper landmass size. And the truth is that the more and more you make world maps, the better and better you'll get at making landmass shapes to make them more believable or more realistic, if that's what you prefer, right? The idea is to make them believable. So the more and more you practice these methods, the more maps you make, the less you'll end up relying on these methods, because you're slowly developing an eye as a cartographer, as an artist, about what kind of shapes that you want to put on your land masses. So it's something that just takes a little bit of time and a little bit of practice. Okay, let's go ahead and I'm just going to clear everything here. So I'm just going to go clear all. We're going to get rid of that. Now, another method that you can do that's going to help with landmass shapes is using a texture. And I went into my favorites and I picked out a whole bunch of textures in here, which I find to be quite helpful. Oh, and you know what? I wanted to showcase something as well, and I forgot to mention this. You can actually move landmasses. It's a new feature. So if I take a landmass and then if I go here to move area, I can select the area and then I can move it. Now we haven't included rotating an area yet, so just know that that's a nice little feature that once you've created your landmass shapes, you can move them if you want to make sure that they're in the right location. So kind of a nice little thing that you can do there. So let's go ahead and remove everything here. We'll clear all. So using a texture is so incredibly helpful. So if I go ahead and select background and just select the texture that has a lot of artifacts, you can go fill, and then you can change adjust the size. So you have a texture scale here and you go fill. And then what you can do is you can use the artifacts within this to create a landmass shape. So let's just say that I want to follow some of the line work here. And this will kind of help me to create my landmass shape. So using textures as a guide to create your landmass is extremely helpful. And then when you're done filling in all those landmass shapes, which you've used from a texture, then you can just fill the BG layer again with your water texture. So kind of a nice little trick there. BG, what I recently used, fill, and then you have your shape. So using textures can be extremely helpful when putting that together. So let's go ahead and fill this again. Let's try another texture so you can see the other ones as well. Let's fill this one. I'll go ahead and clear. All right, we're gonna have to clear all. There we go. So you notice that there's some shapes right here as well, right? Not complex. You can go in with the add mode of that mask tool again and just kind of fill in the shape here. If you don't like the shapes of the artifacts, you can always go with the negative space. That's the darker green sections. You can use that to create your land masses, okay? Because have talked with some cartographers, and some of the newer people do kind of struggle with like creating a shape. And so you can think creative and look at textures and the artifacts and the line work, the negative space, to kind of put together your landmass shapes. So that's what I think is quite helpful. And then again, once you've created those landmass shapes, then you can move them with that new feature that I mentioned, right? You have that feature there, and you go in here. You can go in, select this, move it apply, right? So you get the general idea is that you can create those shapes from using the textures. There's a lot of textures that you can choose from that I feel work. There's this sewer one. There's this one with this kind of earth. There's this cavern one. You'll see there's these cracks in the image. This one works just fine. And then I also find that this forest one works as well. You can kind of use the shapes to kind of fill them in. So be creative, pick a texture that works for you, that you feel that has all the necessary kind of artifacts in it that you want to use for. All right, so there's a second method, and okay, for you to use. Now there are other methods that you can use. Now this next method requires just a little bit more knowledge of the tool, but not too much. We're going to be actually using the shape tool to create landmasses, because what's really cool is that the shape tool has an option where you can use a mask tool as the fill. So kind of helpful there. So if I set it to brush and I turn off my stroke color and I choose fill, and then I choose this one right here, these masks right here, and then you can kind of create landmass shapes just like we did with the mask tool, right, to create your landmass, right? And what's really nice about using this is that you can rotate them. Unlike the mask tool, which you can't rotate yet, you can move them, but you can't rotate them. And so this gives you this opportunity to kind of move things around more to your choice. Like if you wanted to have more of this landmass in the polar region, so the tip of it was in a polar region, but you didn't fill it out far enough, you can just move it upward, okay? And again, with the mask tool, or with the shape tool, same thing with the mask tool. You start with a big blob first for a continent shape, and then you bring the mask size down, or not the mask size, but the brush size down to kind of create more detailed parts of it. So if you wanted to create like a horn, maybe you wanted to have some kind of spike part at the bottom of the landmass here, and then you bring it down even smaller to get the even finer details. And you can follow that in whichever order you want. Normally, when I create these shapes, I start with the blobs first for every single shape, every single continent that I'm going to create, and then I'll focus on this next step, putting in the finer details. So, and just make sure that you look it over, because you might miss a spot like I did right there. So I missed a spot, go add right there, and just kind of make sure that I got everything. And of course, you do want your merge shape selected so that you can merge them together. Now I went ahead and created a whole bunch of landmass shapes. And what I did is I kind of put these shapes together already. And then I'm going to use these, not necessarily as stencils, but as modular pieces that I can put together. And so I made a series of ones that have horns, boots. I made some larger ones, some smaller ones, some U-shaped ones. And so what we'll do is I'm going to unlock it, and I'm going to ungroup it. And now I have all these shapes available to me to maneuver around. Now, I had mentioned, and this is the method that I'm going to end up using to make the map. So what I'll do here is I'm going to bring all these down and scale, and we'll scale them up later. But for now, I'm going to scale these down and move them out of the way. There we go. So now I have those shapes there, so that's helpful. And I want to make sure that I have my climate zone guide. I'm going to have this up a little bit. Here we go. Now, in the beginning, remember I mentioned in my world there's like a tier in which a goddess created the oceans and where the tier dropped. So what I want to do is maybe decide a place where I want the teardrop to be. I think it's nice and fitting to put it on the equator, but I'm not going to put it dead center, because I find that dead center is a little weird. I mean, as an artist myself, I kind of like to put things a little off center instead of dead center. So what I might do is put the tier part over here, and then I'm going to have the landmasses kind of maybe emanating from it, or casting from it, or maybe framing around it. And then that way I kind of have my lore of my creation myth kind of mixed in right away with the world that I'm creating. So this part is pretty easy. And what I do is I just start putting pieces together, and I need to decide, do I want massive polar caps? do, and I usually start at the top or the bottom. I start with my polar regions and I kind of move my way in. The reason why I start with the polar regions is because that will kind of frame in the temperate zone inward to the closer to the equator, all right? So that kind of frames it. So do you want a large polar region, a small one? And so what I think for the top one is I'll just have kind of a relatively small polar region at the top. I'm not going to make it massive. I kind of like this hook right here. I think that looks good. We'll put that there. Let's put another one right here. I'll just scale it up. And then it creates kind of a nice little inlet right here. You'll see right here, there's a nice little inlet here. We'll make it a little bit bigger. I'll put it against here. That looks good. Let's put another hook in right here. That should create another inlet, a part of the inlet right here. So there's our polar region, and it even goes into the temperate zone a little bit. And now let's start pushing things. The temperate lines, those are really easy. I just use the snap to grid, line tool, and text. So just make sure that you use it as the grid as your guide. And at the end of the stream, when this video is added to YouTube, I've got a bunch of guides, all the guides that I'm using here, including all these land masses. I have these landmass groups. All of that stuff I'll share in the video description on YouTube, okay? So that way, all that information is there. So I have this polar region right here. Let's start now putting the land masses around the tier. Yeah, now I can connect them if I want to create a large continent. This is a large continent, several thousand miles wide, so it's quite large. So just kind of remember that. Let's put another one in right here. Let's see here. Let's not use that one quite yet. I like this little hook right here. I think that looks good. Let's put it in right there. Let's go ahead and push this one right here. Let's see here. All right, let's take a look here. How do I go about this? Ooh, you know, I kind of like this shape right here. This is a nice shape, kind of an interesting kind of line to it. And then I think I'll push it in a little bit more so that way I'm connecting it. And then eventually, if you will end up painting or using the brush to kind of connect these together, and then we can shave or add more as we go. It's up to you, okay? So we'll go ahead and add that. I want to, right now we've got this polar cap up here. Let's have no polar cap at the bottom part. Let's put just freezing cold ocean there. But I do want to put in more continents here, and I have these two more stencils here. You can always select, copy and paste, and add more as well. Again, you can rotate them, move them around. So let's put in another one right here. We're going to make this nice and big. I think I like that. And then what I have is I have some negative space here, which is good. I want to have some negative space. What makes the positive space, and by positive space, I mean land masses, what make them pop out, make them stand out the most is the negative space around them, because that's what kind of defines the shapes, is that negative ocean space around it. Let's see here. I don't think I need to have any more over here. I might even want to consider connecting these ones. Let's see here. Sometimes you just got to move them around to kind of see what looks best. I kind of like this little slope right there. I kind of like that. That looks good. I have a couple more. You remember, you don't have to use all of them. Let's see here. I'm thinking 1, 2, 3. We have 3 really big continents. Let's put in maybe a 4th one. Scale this down. And then we'll put in this 5th one here. And I think I'll put this one right here. And this has got this nice little fingers, kind of a flanged kind of feel to it. And I kind of like that. So that might be an interesting history that I can put into that one. And of course, if you want more land masses, you can totally just copy and paste the ones that we have, rotate, and just put another one in there if you want. This is a much smaller one. This is probably a little bit more closer to the size of the United States, because it's about 2,500, about 2,500 square miles right here. That's pretty big. All these other ones are massive, more maybe probably closer to, you know, Russia and the kind of the European continents. It's a little bit, these are much bigger. Well, not necessarily Europe, but Russia for sure. So once you've kind of put that together, then you kind of have your general regions together. So how much time do I have? Oh, great. So now that I've put that together, I kind of want to merge these shapes together. So what I'll end up doing is just take a large brush and then kind of putting these together, and these will all merge these shapes together. So this should be one whole shape. Oh, I see another shape there. We'll go ahead and merge that. There we go. This should be a whole shape now. Yep, there we go. Great. Same thing with this one. See, this has got two shapes. I want to merge them. So let's go ahead and just do that. That should be a whole shape now. Perfect. Same thing with this one. This has got multiple shapes on it. So we'll have to end up going all the way across and then making sure that all these merge together. There we go. Excellent. This one is already a shape and this one is already a shape. So that's perfect. So now you have all your continents put together. So let's go ahead and save that. And we're going to do that next step, which is to throw in all the archipelagos, the tiny islands. Remember that step? And we're not going to use the mass tool. We're going to continue to use the shape tool to do this, right? And if you feel like you're not satisfied with the location, everything, you can still select everything and just move it. I mean, that's kind of the beautiful thing about using the shape tool, because with the mass tool, you can't move more than one mass at a time. You can only select one and then move it. This one, you can select everything. And this is really up to you and which way you want to go about it. So I'll maybe push this a little bit inward. I don't want it to be perfectly straight. And I might push this one a little bit more this way. Let's see here. Let's push it right here. Let's see here. Might want to reconsider the shape a little bit. Maybe moving it over to here. Looks good. Let's see here. Maybe some curve. You know, I think this right here looks good. It creates a nice little straight right here, and I kind of like that. So that looks good. Okay. Then we're going to go in with the shape tool, and I'm going to turn my merge shape off for now so I don't accidentally merge, because they're islands, right? They're not going to be attached. We're going to go with a really small brush size. The smallest brush size that you can get is 5. So what we'll do here is I'm going to maybe create, like I said, some archipelagos that kind of connected some of the continents. Like right here, you've got this nice little big kind of straight right here, some space. And so what I'll do is I'll create some islands in here with a small brush. Right in here, maybe some here, maybe a bigger one. Right here, one right here. Let's take a step back and look at it. I think that looks good. This has got this kind of flange size. What size is this map? This is going across 20,000 square miles, or 20,000 miles, 20,000 miles across, and up and down it's 15,000. Okay? So I set scale in the beginning. You can always just start the stream at the beginning and you'll see that I mentioned scale. So again, these continents are massive, but it's important. I kind of want them to be big because I'm focusing on epic, remember? So I want them to be big, and I also want them to be big because I want to have space for the stamps to fit on, because the smaller that your land masses are, the less space, the less canvas you have to work with stamps. So kind of think of this ahead. If your land masses are tiny, if they're only like 1,000 miles, and it's at that small scale, just know that your stamps will have to be absolutely tiny. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about, right? So this is the smallest scale that a stamp can get at 1. Here it is at 10, okay? So this is how big scale is. So just remember how important that is. And remember, scale can be broken. Stamps don't have to be perfect, right? A stamp doesn't have to be exact. It's all the beautiful thing about fantasy is that you can stretch the representation of reality further beyond reality. So once we get to that stage of putting down stamps, I'll show you how to go about doing that. And I noticed right away I'm looking at this and I noticed I missed a couple things. So I want to go ahead and add some steps here, fill that in. Okay, and then we'll get back to making islands. Hello, welcome first time chatters. And again, I'll make this map clonable at the end of the stream, and that link will be provided in the description of the... Oopsie, I didn't merge the shapes. I just noticed that. My bad. So now I got to go back and merge all this stuff. Merge shapes. There we go. There we go. Now they're all merged together. My mistake. Okay, just going to go fix all these little mistakes. You can always do it later on in the map, but they're easier to see when you don't have any content like stamps on top of them. That's why I generally try to clean up this stuff before I start putting down stamps so that I can see them. Oh yes, happy little accidents. Well, expect a lot of those. It's all part of the process. And you know what? Sometimes the mistakes are the best stuff. Like I've noticed that some of my best work, some of my best continent shapes were just completely by accident. I didn't mean to do that, but it just kind of grew off of that. It's one of the pleasures of being a cartographer, right? Or an artist in general. You make a mistake and you're like, ooh, that was a delicious mistake. I wish all of my mistakes would be delicious like that, but they're not. Usually mistakes are just agitating, but once in a while you kind of you hit you hit a little gold vein, with some of your mistakes, and that's just all part of the process, right? So let's continue making the smaller islands like I mentioned with the shape tool. And of course, also you'll want to do your finishing touches as well. So if you start seeing some strange straight lines, then start fixing those up, right? You start seeing some weird globs, like this circular shape right here, that just looks odd. So you'll go in and fix that on top of putting in your islands as well. And always remember to have your islands kind of fit into the shape or the contour of the coastline so that it fits. It looks like it came together. Nice little tricks that you can do when putting it together. Yes, making them look natural is very, very difficult, but it's okay. There's many systems of creating maps. I always just stick with scale, the climate guide, and then later on we'll put down mountains to set stamp scale, which will be different. So it's a lot of work when you're putting together a fantasy world map. What I don't generally do is focus 100% on reality, because most players are not going to be sitting there scrutinizing how realistic a horn or an archipelago is. And if your players are like that, more power to them. I mean, that's great. Like, that's awesome that your players are dedicated to the minute and the details like that. But as a DM, you're going to notice that a lot of your time is always kind of taken up with all of these tasks, planning encounters and doing all of those things. And you want to know something? It's a lot of work to be a DM. I mean, it's a burden to be a world builder and a DM, right? It's a lot of work. And so one thing that I try not to do is not get hyper focused on reality, because what that does is it puts me down a rabbit hole, and then I end up having no time to actually work on other parts of my campaign. I spent 2 weeks just trying to make sure that my landmasses were perfect, and that I took all this time to create these perfect plate tectonics where all my mountains are going to be and all that stuff. And that took weeks and weeks and weeks, but that was also weeks and weeks that you as a DM might have had time for to start putting other things together. So it's a lot of work to kind of put together this stuff. So don't let it overpower you. Don't get too hyper focused on one thing for too long. Otherwise, it kind of sucks up your time, because I've noticed that. So really, what you'll do is you'll just continue adding more islands, because this is going to be the final piece that I'm going to end up working with. So I'll continue just adding more to the land masses, adding islands as I see fit where I want them. And some features, some great features I like to add are like horns. I feel like great way to bring out some great land masses is to create some distinct features, like a strait, a sea, a archipelago, a horn, these flanged like fingers right here. This is a very distinctive shape, right? It's very interesting. Crescent shapes are very interesting. Finger shaped shoe shapes like this. All of these shapes are interesting, right? And trying to add each one in is very, very, can be kind of difficult. So let's keep adding in the last bit of this stuff. Where are we at for time? Oh, we're doing great. So let's just keep adding in the islands, and then we'll continue, and then we'll go into that next kind of step, which is putting in your bodies of water. And this is going to be one of those things where scale might be conflicting. So because here's the thing, when it comes to creating like a river or a lake, just know that at a certain scale, you wouldn't even be able to see. Because this is 1,000 square miles per cell grid, at a very zoomed out scale, you probably wouldn't even see a river, so you wouldn't even have to put it down. And just so you know, the mask tool only has a certain size that it can get, and the same thing with the brush size of this. So if I go to subtract and I want to create in a lake, or create a river, you'll notice that the river is huge, right? So if you're feeling like, well, I'm willing to depart from scale a little bit and create rivers, then maybe you want to consider using like the path tool, or the shape, or not the path tool, but the line tool. And you can just choose a color that you want. And I'll choose like a color. I try to pick around the same color as the ocean color, or relatively close to that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but close enough. And then with this, you can actually change the stroke size. Let's turn off the shadows as well. I don't need that. Let's just apply real quick. Let's take a look at it. Make sure that it's up a layer. There we go. And let's increase the size. There we go. And then with this, you can actually create your rivers, all right? And there is river texture as well. It's up to you which one you want to use. There's a lot of different ways to go about it. It's up to you how you want to go and to use it. That's the beauty of Inkarnate, is there's more than one way to do anything. So if you want to use texture, if you want to use the subtract mode of the mask tool, if you're using landmasses, there's just so many different ways to go over this. And I think once we finish this series, we'll probably make another world map, and we'll tackle it in a different way. We'll do it different ways each time. Now, I'm not going to put in rivers right now, because I usually don't do rivers until I get to the mountains. But I did want to just kind of show you that, hey, when it comes to rivers, it really depends on the scale. So the farther you're kind of zoomed out, your rivers might not even be visible at all. So it's just up to you, okay? Let's go ahead and see where we are for time. Let's save the changes. We're going to save this. And once you feel that you've kind of gotten the land masses kind of together, then we can start getting into painting just a little bit. We're going to paint just a little bit here. And what we'll do is we'll paint each zone with a texture, and then we'll call it good. And we'll talk about what will be in part 2. So let's go over here. Let's look up, you can look up snow or ice. You've got some land white. You've got some snow here. Let's go with this color for now. Now remember, these are clipping masks. Clipping masks are the FG layer, right? That's anything made with the add mode of the mask tool or clipping masks. So I'm going to go in. I'm just going to paint this where the line is. The polar region stops right there. Same thing here. Polar region here. This is just kind of getting me set up for biomes in the future. As for temperate, I think I'll go with like a green color, because where there's a lot of water, a lot of moisture, a lot of rain, there's a lot of life, right? A lot of water. So we'll go with this deeper color. And these colors are going to change, by the way, as we go. These will change. For now, this is just to give us a start. And it also just looks cool. Okay, I think that looks fine. Go to the other temperate zone here. We'll paint that one in. And when it comes to the tropics and subtropics, I'll leave it with that lighter green for now. There we go. Same thing here. There we go. And then we can even just go with an even lighter kind of green with this one right here. Okay. Now, when it comes to deserts and high desert and wastelands and stuff, that's something we'll get to later, because mountains play a huge role in the placement of biomes on continents. I mean, absolutely massive role. So we won't get to that, unfortunately, in this stream, but in the next stream, we'll be putting down mountains and then planning for our biomes. But this is kind of that first step. Let's just quickly review. Remember, set scale immediately. If you've already created a world map, then you'll have to play with the scale a little bit. If you're creating a new world map, then just set the scale immediately, right away. When you're creating, go to a custom size, and then decide what each individual cell is, its value, whatever its measurement is, 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles, whatever it may be. Just remember that the larger the increments are, the smaller the scale of the stamps. So just remember that. And a part of a map is its artistic, quality, right? It's how beautiful it looks. So if you want to be able to see the stamps without having to zoom in real close, remember to pick the scale very, very carefully, because that all plays a role. Scale plays a huge role, and it also plays a role in where your biomes are going to be, how your mountains are going to be placed, what size the mountains are going to be. All of that is going to be super important. So after you've set the scale, then you're going to want to turn on that grid. Then you're going to want to set your climate zones. Remember, use the line tool, choose snap to grid against the grid, and then start with your equator and then branch out with each zone. When you start at the equator, move out towards the tropics, the subtropics, the temperate zone, and then up into the polar regions where it's going to be very, very cold. So this is just the start. So I'll go ahead and save this. Now in the next one, like I said, we'll cover mountains, we'll cover biomes. That's what we're going to be covering in this next stream. So thank you, everyone. We kept this one nice and short. We just kept it under 45 minutes. I like to keep them as little short as possible, but I hoped that a part of this kind of works out. And I noticed that Bitter Dan, always remember that when you're working on sections like this, remember to step out. I mentioned this in the masterclass on Monday or on Tuesday, which was yesterday, to zoom out, because what ends up happening is that you get hyper focused on a region and you didn't realize that there might be more map to work with. So it's always good to do this every 15 minutes or so. It doesn't have to be exact, but after 1,000 changes, 100 changes, whatever it might be, maybe after you save, remember to scale out and then press save, so that way you don't accidentally lose sight of the bigger picture. This is something that every artist, every cartographer does: scale out, step out, zoom out, so that way you can get the larger picture. Because again, you get hyper focused on one region and then you kind of forgot about other things, and it kind of, I don't know, it ruins the flow. You get frustrated, you hit something you might have to fix. So if I were you, however many often you save, always zoom out after that save. All right, well, I'm going to cut it at 45 minutes, and I look forward to the next stream, which is going to be about 2 weeks from now. The next stream coming up, I believe, which is the following Monday, is going to be a master class, and we're going to be using those beautiful new Fantasy World heraldry stamps to create heraldry for your empires, your noble houses, maybe your nation's coat of arms, your nation's flags, your military banners, standards, all of these things right here. All of those things we're going to be covering in our heraldry masterclass on the following Monday. Yes, this is an official Inkarnate Twitch, by the way, so thanks for asking. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. I will see you all on the following Monday for our masterclass. Please stay safe and healthy, and merry map making, everyone. I'll talk to you later. Bye.